A few years ago, I spent an entire month staying at my girlfriend's dad's house, nestled between a sprawling section of woods and a serene lake. The property was massive, stretching across acres, and her dad owned much of the surrounding land, including a large chunk of the forest. One of my favorite things to do was to walk through a narrow, almost secretive path that cut through the woods, just to clear my mind. The walk gave me time to think, away from the world, with only the whisper of leaves and the distant sound of the lake. It was on one particularly foggy day that I felt the need to escape and take my usual walk. The fog was thick that day, almost unnaturally so. It felt like the fog was wrapping itself around everything, obscuring the world beyond a few feet in front of me. I grabbed my hiking boots, told my girlfriend I'd be back in a little while, and set off into the woods. She didn't enjoy the woods, so I usually went alone. As I entered the narrow clearing, the fog seemed to swallow me whole, and I could barely make out the trees around me. The air was thick, and I could hardly see more than 15 feet ahead. It had been years since I'd seen fog this dense, and I didn't like how it felt. It was as though the fog itself was alive, hiding something in its depths. It was then that I heard it, footsteps, but not just my own, someone else's. The sound of boots crunching against the forest floor, mirroring my every step. At first I thought I was imagining it, but it was too distinct, too synchronized. I stopped walking and listened carefully, calling out, "Hello?" The forest responded with only silence. I waited for a moment, convinced it was nothing. After all, this was private land. No one should be here. I decided to continue, but the eerie feeling didn't leave me. The fog drifted lazily through the trees. The ground beneath my boots crackled with each step, and in the distance I could hear the occasional chirp of crickets. It should have been calming, but instead it only added to the strange, foreboding atmosphere. Then I heard it again, this time much clearer, a moaning sound. It wasn't just a grunt or a groan, it was a deep, discomforting sound, like an elderly man struggling with pain. I froze. I wasn't alone anymore. I couldn't tell if the person was hurt or just lost, but I felt compelled to help. The noise was coming from further into the woods. I called out again, "Hello, are you okay?" I began to move closer, each step more cautious than the last. As I got nearer, I saw something in the fog. It was a figure standing in the distance, just far enough that I could make out the outline of a person, but the details were shrouded in the mist. The moaning had stopped, and I wondered if the person was okay. I called out once more, asking if they needed help, but there was no response. I took a few more steps toward the figure, but it didn't seem to move. I was still a good distance away. I began to feel uneasy, my instinct telling me something wasn't right. I yelled louder, asking if they were okay, but there was no answer. The figure stood still, unmoving. It was as though it had heard me, but it didn't react. I took 2 more large steps toward it. Suddenly, I realized that no matter how much I moved forward, I wasn't getting any closer to this figure. My heart began to race. I turned around and began to walk back, not wanting to take any chances. I glanced over my shoulder, and to my horror, the figure was still there, standing in the exact same spot as if it hadn't moved at all. But now something was different. It didn't have legs. The lower half of the figure was just gone, like it was floating in the fog. Panic hit me like a wave. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps, my heart pounding in my chest. Every time I turned to look, the figure was still there, hovering behind me, maintaining the same distance. It was like it was following me, but it never got any closer. The realization hit me. This wasn't human. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as I ran faster, trying to escape. I broke through the edge of the woods, nearly stumbling into the yard of the house. I didn't look back, but I could still feel it. Whatever that thing was, it was still there, just beyond the tree line. I slammed the door behind me, breathless and shaken. My girlfriend, her dad, and her brother came rushing in, hearing the noise I'd made. I pointed towards the fog, my voice trembling, and said, "There's something in the woods." It was following me. Her dad, calm and unfazed, put on his shoes and went outside with me. We stood by the back door, and I pointed to where I had last seen the figure. The fog was still thick, but there was nothing there now, just empty woods. He patted me on the shoulder, reassuring me that with him, me and the two dogs, there was nothing to worry about, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I knew what I'd seen. I wasn't one to believe in ghosts, but whatever that was in the woods, it was real. It wasn't a trick of the fog or my imagination. That was the closest thing to something paranormal I'd ever experienced, and it still haunts me to this day. This story really gets under your skin because of the eerie isolation and how the figure seems to defy the natural world. It's the kind of thing that keeps you looking over your shoulder even when you know it's just fog.